Hi, folks. This is my second update today for Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. In this stream, I want to talk about John Fetterman versus Mehmet Oz. Hello, Dolores. How are you? Very glad you're here. And thank you for being here. Let's get right to this major contest. There was a piece that was done in The Intercept on October 19th by Akila Lacey that discusses this very important race in Pennsylvania. I will do both a critique of the race, and a critique of the piece by Akila Lacey. The title is "The Biggest, Dumbest Race for the Senate." Subtitle is John Fetterman's competition against Dr. Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania could determine consequential rights nationwide. Have the candidates forgotten that? This was published October 19th, 2022. So it is current news, and there's a picture of John Fetterman holding out his arms to expose his tattoos, standing by an American flag after being introduced by Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware. This occurred on October 15th, 2022, so just a relatively few days ago. I suppose one should note that Chris Coons is a Democratic Party centrist, someone who's very close to President Joe Biden. So Lacey's article starts with, "It started with something serious." Quote, "My recovery may be a joke to Dr. Oz and his team, but it's real for me," unquote, said John Fetterman, Pennsylvania's Democratic lieutenant governor, in late August. It had been roughly 3 months since he had, in quick succession, suffered a stroke that nearly killed him and clinched his party's nomination to represent Pennsylvania in the U.S. Senate. Senator, I should say, his opponent, Dr. Mehmet Oz, a TV doctor, became Fetterman's Republican opponent. He invited Fetterman to a series of 5 debates while he recovered. How gracious of him to call for 5 debates while he was recovering from a stroke, and undoubtedly had some speech-related problems from the stroke. Wasn't that generous of Dr. Oz to do? Anyway, Fetterman declined them all. In the 2 months since, the candidates in one of the hottest Senate races in the country have still never engaged face-to-face. They've instead battled on the internet, where a laid-up Fetterman put out content, much of which he crafted himself, fresh enough to break through the miasma on Twitter. Oz meanwhile, seized on Fetterman's fitness, emphasizing the reluctance to debate. They will finally do so on October 25th, just 2 weeks before the election. Uh, can someone check for me when the date of the debate is? For some reason, I thought it was on October 28th. I might just be mistaken, but if someone could check on that, I'd be grateful. The Oz campaign's urging may seem mean spirited, especially considering that the Republican is a retired cardiothoracic surgeon, an experienced TV personality with teams of paid handlers to help him appear suave on screen. Does he appear suave on screen? Was he suave during the crudité ad? But the fact that the candidates have not confronted one another on substantive policy issues is significant. Pennsylvania is a crucial swing state, often looked to as a barometer for the rest of the country. It has grabbed headlines repeatedly for questions governing crime, labor, and industry, and yet neither of its next potential senators has expressed much of a vision that wouldn't fit in a meme. That a race which politicians and strategists have anticipated for years has become so vapid tells us more about modern American electoral politics than any of the nonstop horse race polling could. Substance is a liability, and the base is everything. Social media is an attractive battleground. The soundbite has been replaced by the meme war. That's an attractive paragraph. I'm not sure it's entirely accurate, but it's an attractive paragraph. I suppose because I'm not sure the soundbite has been replaced by the meme war, there have been plenty of soundbites too. Anyway, while Fetterman has campaigned aggressively on weed legalization, common sense gun control, and preserving the right to abortion, he has seldom engaged us on the issues. Well, she just said he campaigned aggressively on 3 issues. If he wasn't going to have a debate with Oz, then how else could he engage Oz on those issues? She says, going on, that's partially because Oz himself is campaigning on little other than putting Americans first, a slogan whose strength lies in its lack of meaning, and attacking Fetterman as a socialist who wants to let convicted murderers run wild. But Fetterman, oh, by the way, for attacking Fetterman, in that way, as a socialist who wants to let convicted murderers run wild, I think I should be disqualified from the race just for doing that. Not that it's so ridiculous to say that Fetterman is a socialist, though it is fairly ridiculous because every Democrat who the Republicans run against is usually characterized as a socialist, even though there's minimal evidence that they are socialists. In our case, there's minimal evidence, certainly. But Fetterman has the opportunity to confront voters with what Pennsylvania could look like with Oz in the Senate. What reversing Biden's failed agendas, Oz promises, would mean for wages, health care, and unemployment rates, or why having another self-proclaimed pro-life senator could destroy the lives of countless people across the state, not to mention the country. Rather than try to reason with Oz's attacks, Fetterman's campaign has conjured a steady stream of its own hits. So, in other words, Fetterman has concluded that trying to have a reasoned discussion with Oz is probably fruitless because Republicans don't try to do a discussion with campaign opponents by trying to reason with them. What they do is issue a steady stream of hits. So Fetterman probably figured he better do a steady stream of his own hits too. The strategy, which started out with simple jabs at Oz for living in New Jersey, has evolved into a series of viral tweets and videos that have made a mockery of his campaign and driven Fetterman's fame and fundraising haul to new levels. I think Fetterman did make a mockery of Oz's campaign. I also think Oz's campaign deserved to be made a mockery of because it was far from a substantive campaign. The only problem with spending your time making a mockery of that campaign, the only problem with that is that then your own campaign sinks to levels where there's nothing substantive about it. Pennsylvania voters driving last week near Lincoln Financial Field, the home of the Philadelphia Eagles, would have seen a billboard telling them that Oz is a Cowboys fan. Well, that's not very substantive. Earlier this month, Fetterman's campaign blitzed its email lists with news that experiments overseen by Oz killed upwards of 300 dogs. So Lacey is pointing this out as if it's not substantive. But of course, the issue behind that is that Oz was engaged in activities that were cruel to animals and that involved killing upwards of 300 dogs. The cruelty to animals issue is a substantive issue with many, many people. There are many, many dog lovers across the state of Pennsylvania that probably think that it's not okay to kill dogs in experiments. There was also the picture, going back to the article, of Oz posing with fans at a Penn State tailgate, a tailgate party. The candidates sipped red wine under a tent while the young attendees stood drenched in rain, holding red Solo cups. And the crudité debacle, which Fetterman's campaign maneuvered into another example that Oz is an out-of-touch millionaire and capitalized on for a self-described $500,000 fundraising boon. Is that fundraising boom or fundraising boon? I'm not sure. But I think I have to add that there is an issue that Oz is an out-of-touch millionaire. I think that is an issue in the campaign for those considering voting for him. So I'm not sure that's not a real issue. We're so used to having rich people run and thinking that they'd be good people to vote for, that there's so many of us never even consider the question of whether they're in touch with the problems of real people. So Lacey said earlier he should be talking about what reversing Biden's failed agenda, he being Fetterman, talking about what his reversing Biden's agenda would mean for wages, health care, and unemployment rate, or why having another self proclaimed pro life senator could destroy the lives of countless people across the country and across the state. But of course, raising the higher level issue that he's an out of touch candidate who doesn't have the concerns of ordinary people at heart, that kind of quickly leads to those other issues that Lacey wanted Fetterman to bring up. Anyway, she says Fetterman's adoption of some of the lowballing tactics that might seem more fitting for a vacuous TV personality like ours has not, however, definitively proved to be successful, even as his aggressive social media strategy nets national supporters and donors. New polling in recent weeks has shown Fetterman's lead over Oz cut in half since August. Well, that may be, but maybe the social media strategy doesn't have anything to do with that. That Fetterman's lead was cut in half could have something to do with doubts that people have about his stroke. It could also have something to do with the general decline in Democratic fortunes very recently, as the voters become aware that what Democrats are concentrating on is pretty much only abortion rights and the idea that the Trumpists are going to take over our democracy. So the party's concentration on those two main issues may be resulting in a decline of enthusiasm for Fetterman. There is a party impact on candidates. Maybe that's why his lead has been cut in half. Anyway, if he fails, according to Lacey, Republicans will gain one more seat in the Senate, one more likely vote in favor of draconian crackdowns on rights from abortion to education to voter access. And if he wins, where will he stand among the Democrats? Before I try to answer that question, I want to point out that if he fails, the Republicans are not gaining one more seat in the Senate. What they'd be doing is holding that seat, because that seat is currently held until January by one Senator Toomey, who has been the senator now for quite a few years, and no more faithful creature of Wall Street has ever been created than Senator Toomey, who was, before he came the senator from Pennsylvania, the president for the Club for Growth, the founder of the Club for Growth, and the leading proponent of growth, more important than everything else. He has been a supporter of fracking. He's been a supporter of tax cutting. He has been, like most Republicans, someone who votes against abortion rights. So, this race represented an opportunity for Democrats to gain a seat and for the Republicans not to lose a seat. But it wasn't an opportunity for the Republicans to gain one more seat in the Senate. That statement was simply incorrect. Okay, it was an inaccurate one. The page that Democrats are encouraged to take from Fetterman covers tone. He seems accessible, relatable. The press loves to point out his blocky tattoos and hulking height as he goes gleefully, and his sweatshirts, Bonnie says, as he goes gleefully for the kill in widespread and well-liked tweets. Once fashionable concerns about populism seem to fade, he has been pitched as the antidote to help Democrats speak to the white working class they've long sought after. Pennsylvania ultimately decided the 2020 presidential election for Joe Biden, and voters in Philadelphia played a significant role in that win. Many of them were driven by issues of police brutality, racial justice, economic inequality, and criminal justice reform. Likely appealing to those voters in the primary, Fetterman has long embraced the populist style taken up by politicians like Bernie Sanders, who he endorsed for president in 2016, but not in 2020. The attitude is typically associated with the suite of left-leaning priorities that have come to define the progressive movement, specifically Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, sweeping reforms to the criminal justice system, and a rethinking of U.S. foreign policy. These days, his campaign seems light on those topics. With Medicare for All falling out of fashion, Fetterman's campaign website advocates, quote, any legislation that gets us closer to the goal of universal health care, unquote. But I have to add, since his stroke, he seems to be back on board with Medicare for All. He said it brought him face to face to what it could mean for people to have Medicare for All. He has said that while pushing a transition to clean energy, he supports fracking and preserving jobs in the natural gas industry, a contradiction to the core tenets of a Green New Deal. While Fetterman has been vocal on his commitment to criminal justice reform, the Philadelphia Inquirer proclaimed in May that, quote, John Fetterman ran the Board of Pardons like an activist, unquote. His platform shies away from any specific proposals outside of sentencing reform and diversion programs. And on foreign policy, he appears firmly within the mainstream. One of the specific stances he's articulated is his, quote, unwavering, unquote, support for Israel. In his home state, Fetterman has so far stayed away from one of the most influential political fights of the moment. As Republican lawmakers in rural parts of Pennsylvania fast-track efforts to impeach reform-minded Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, Fetterman, in his capacity as lieutenant governor, has refused to weigh in. In an interview Tuesday with Semaphore, Fetterman said he agreed with Krasner on some issues, but disagreed on others. I think, quote, I think we need to be having a better relationship with the police, unquote, he said, quote again, and making sure that the police feel supported by the DA, unquote. Fetterman's campaign did not respond to The Intercept's request for comment. At least to a point, Fetterman's strategy seems to be working. Yes, the consensus of the polls still shows Fetterman 3 to 4 points ahead, with, of course, how many weeks to go now? Let's see, about 17 days now, right, till November 8th. Seems to be working if fundraising and social media metrics are to be believed. Pennsylvania voters outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are notably conservative and engaging in wonky policy debates with Oz may risk tarnishing the man of the people image Fetterman has pushed. I kind of agree with that statement from the standpoint of wanting to win. Fetterman may be right to be skirting some controversial issues. You have to point out that Oz is also skirting some controversial issues. So maybe the Pennsylvania race is just not about policy, and maybe that's okay. Once the shitposting, that was Lacey's word, not mine, and media tours are over, of course, someone will actually be tasked with representing the state of Pennsylvania in the Senate. And regardless of all the theorizing about messaging tools and toxic topics, the future senator's constituents will have real challenges they expect to be addressed. Ahead of this year's midterm elections, Pennsylvania voters rank the economy, abortion rights, and climate change among their top concerns. One candidate will arguably do a better job representing their interests on those issues than the other, but that's not the case that's being made. Well, neither one of the candidates seems to want to talk about those top issues. I wonder whether it's not up to the voters themselves to continuously raise those issues in personal appearances that the candidates are making, in town hall meetings, in protests, okay, that people do. And obviously, the candidates think that it's not wise for them to try to address the three top issues. And maybe that's why the case that those issues ought to be addressed is not being made. Oz, for his part, has resorted to running lurid attacks on multiple fronts. For weeks, he and his Republican allies have been painting Fetterman as soft on crime, dropping an ad in August that claimed John Fetterman wants to free murderers. And while none of that is true, it appears to be having an impact as Fetterman's lead in polls has dipped. Some Democratic officials and media outlets have credited the attack ads. Well, as I said above, it may not be those attack ads at all. Maybe the general atmosphere. Okay, it may be that the Democrats themselves have not been raising substantive issues other than the abortion rights issue. If the millions spent on the race in Pennsylvania reflect its importance as a bellwether, where are we left when the lessons learned primarily have to do with tone and not with policy? No matter the winner in November, immediate takeaways will likely run along these lines. If it's Oz, voters wanted someone tough on crime. And if it's Fetterman, voters wanted someone who could connect with regular people. But any analysis that overlooks the banality of recent months will be at best an overstatement and at worst the kind of revisionist history that keeps real substance out of politics. Politicians spend so much time arguing about things that didn't matter, Fetterman says in a campaign ad released Friday. I'll always be focused on what does. It's a reminder of what's at stake, but one that's absent a definition. Perhaps an alternative strategy would fare worse, and Fetterman's vague approach is the safe one. Perhaps its campaign finds it too risky to distinguish his vision of criminal justice reform from the one Oz is trying to paint, or to give voters a clear life of what life might look like under Oz in the Senate. Some might call it cutting through the poll tested bullshit. Others might call it dumbing the voters down. Okay, I too, of course, am sorry there hasn't been more attention to substantive issues in the campaign. I'm particularly sorry that Fetterman has not been focusing on the economics a lot longer. There seems to be underway at least a discussion of a reorientation of the National Democratic campaign. Uh, Perhaps Fetterman should be looking at that but very carefully and adding to his abortion rights, the campaign, uh, lots of statements about the economy and what he is likely to do for the economy in contrast to Oz. There is a Democratic answer to the charge that Joe Biden and his Democrats are responsible for the inflation that's occurring now. It's specifically an argument that has been put forward by the Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, in Washington. They've done some numerical analyses of the various causes of inflation. It turns out that increases in worker salaries is only responsible for about 8% of the inflation we're experiencing right now, while 52% of the inflation seems to be occurring because of price rises by corporations that are making all-time high profits. That suggests that these very corporations are price gouging, taking advantage of the pandemic to price gouge. Of course, the administration has been doing very little to stop the price gouging, but still, Fetterman could call on the administration and call on the party at large to get behind a campaign to stop the price gouging, to get a windfall profits tax, perhaps to institute price controls on corporations again, and keep those profits within reasonable limits. That's an inflation reduction measure too, and it's one that would be very popular. It's one that's quite capable of raising the lead that Fetterman enjoys in this campaign back up to 8 points from the current 3 to 4 that he apparently has. So where is Fetterman when it comes to the economic issues? We need him to go there much more vigorously in the last 17 days of the campaign. If he goes there, if he brings it up during the debate, he's likely to get back some of the points that he has lost. Okay, I'm going to check in now with some of your comments. Kay says Oz is awful. Dolores says he sure is, Kay. Kay says, I saw Rump has his old plane up and going again. Hope he's thinking of skipping the country. Laugh out loud. Maybe he is thinking of skipping the country. With all the legal troubles he's having, he may feel it's about time. If the new Electoral Count Act should pass, the bill that's been written by Liz Cheney, Trump may be prohibited from holding the presidency. So if that occurs, he may feel that a residence in Switzerland at this point might be the best course, of action. So that's all I have to say about that one. I'll see you later. I don't know whether it will be at 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock at this point. Check me at both times, because Ezra, who's going to join me for that, has not actually let me know yet whether he prefers to be available at 5 or 9. But it'll be one of those times, and I'll be scheduling it when I know. And so I will let you know. There is a possibility that I'm actually going to do a 4th stream today, because there's another person in Pennsylvania who would be pretty good to elect. His name is Chris DeLuzio, and he is a Democratic candidate for Congress in Lisa's district, which is the Pennsylvania 17th. And there's an article about him that appeared in the American Prospect, and I would like to talk about that if I have time today. So I might actually be doing 4 streams today rather than 3, is my quota. There's also yet another thing to talk about. The idea that we need a people's Fed. I'd like to talk about that as well. So besides the 5/9 stream that I talked about before, I may even have 2 more things to bring up today. So watch this channel. Watch this channel. I'm feeling very active here today, but I think now it would be a good idea for me to go take a shower and to get ready to go pick up some cottage cheese, because we happen to be running short of cottage cheese. If you want to know why I'm interested in getting some cottage cheese, the reason is, well, I won't tell you the reason specifically. What I'll say is, look up flaxseed oil cottage cheese mix on the web. And if you follow that down, that will give you the reason why. I see I have someone who just has joined. I don't know who that is, but you're in time, just in time for the end of this particular stream. So have a nice afternoon. I'll be seeing you later.